Okay, I am going to read with you guys chapter 16 in Clementine for Christmas. It is Wednesday, December 14th. Gabby strode into the lounge. I have good news and bad, she said. Which do you want first? Gabby had gone to ask the last 3 performers on the list if they'd be willing to sign up for the festival while Josie, Oscar, and Clementine visited a new patient. The bad news, Josie said. She was a big believer in getting bad things over with. Well, unless the bad thing was a horrible choice between her mom and her dog. That was something she was putting off as long as she could. It helped to have the festival plans to distract her. None of the people on the list can do it, Gabby said. They're all going away for the holidays. Josie's shoulders sagged in her plush Mrs. Claus costume. That's really bad news. Is the good news that you signed up 3 replacements? It's not that good, said Gabby, sitting down next to the chair. But I did get an idea of who to ask next. Josie looked over at Oscar, who had been quiet since they arrived. Clementine was curled up in his lap, and Oscar was resting his hands on her soft tan fur. Okay, what's the idea? Josie said. When I was walking back, I saw 2 of the janitors cleaning up a spill in the main hall, Gabby said, pulling out her phone. She'd taken over responsibility for the list. And I realized we should ask some of them to perform. Good thinking, Josie said. She couldn't remember if any of the janitors had been in the festival before, but they tended to be pretty friendly and seemed like a good department to approach. We could ask them to do the Gift of the Magi, Gabby said. That's a kind of classic. I love that story, Josie agreed. She glanced at Oscar, who smiled weakly. Something was clearly wrong, but it was just as clear that he didn't want to talk about it. And I had an idea for an act, too. Oh, great, Gabby said. What? I was thinking we could ask some of the X-ray technicians to do a skeleton Christmas skit, Josie said, playing with her fuzzy costume cuff. She kind of missed Clementine cuddling with her, but clearly her dog knew that Oscar was sad and needed some snuggling. I think a lot of the little kids would love something that was a little scary but also funny, like that. She'd come up with the idea when she'd seen Dr. Scott with an envelope of X-rays. She hoped it didn't sound stupid. That's fabulous, Gabby said. I'm writing it down. She paused 2 seconds to type into her phone. Let's go ask them both. I was thinking maybe you could go ask them while we go perform for the kids, Josie said. She didn't want to be too needy since Gabby was already helping so much, but it always went so well when Gabby was the one making the request. Don't you think you should try asking? Gabby asked. Josie didn't think so at all. It could be good practice, talking to a few people you don't know now, then singing at the show later. Josie didn't understand why Gabby wanted her to perform so much. It's a pretty big leap to talk to one person and then sing to 500 of them, she pointed out. The first steps are the hardest, but the most important, Gabby said. Josie wasn't sure how to get out of it. She shot a pleading glance Oscar's way, but he barely looked up and seemed to miss her distress. I'll stay here with Clementine, he said. She was stuck, but at least she was half hidden in the baggy folds of the velvety Mrs. Claus costume. Okay, she said, standing up. Gabby led the way into the hall where the 2 janitors were done cleaning. One was setting up a caution sign over the wet spot on the floor while the other was wringing out the mop. Josie's feet slowed as they got close. Gabby poked her in the back and Josie jumped. Gabby had sharp fingers. Hi, Josie said as they came up to the workers, the butterflies starting in her chest and making it hard to get enough air. I'm Josie, and Josie's my girl, Nurse Joe called out as he sailed by, pushing a smiling Melanie in a wheelchair. And you too, Gabs. Josie saw Gabby grin at the nickname, but then refocus her attention. Worried she was about to get another poke, Josie continued. we wondered if you guys might, the Christmas festival, the one here at the hospital, she faltered. One guy glanced at the other and both looked concerned that Josie was ill or insane or both. We need volunteers. Josie practically wheezed. Then she felt a hand on her arm. We're signing people up to perform in the Christmas festival, Gabby said smoothly, putting Josie out of her misery. And we wondered if a group of you guys might be willing to do a skit of the Gift of the Magi. Sure, the first janitor said, sticking out his hand. I'm Chris, and this is Zuri. I'm no actor, but this guy takes classes at the college. You do some drama, right? Yeah, Zuri said with an easy smile. I'd love to round up some of our crew to help you out. Fabulous, Gabby said, beaming at them. She whipped out her phone to add them to the list while the two workers headed off. Sorry about that, Josie said weakly. Her face was still on fire from the mortifying incident. Yeah, that was kind of a disaster, Gabby said. The words were blunt, but she was looking at Josie sympathetically. I guess I didn't realize how hard it would be for you. So now you'll do the asking? Josie asked. She was sure Gabby would say yes now that she'd seen what a failure Josie was. But Gabby was shaking her head. The only way you'll get over a fear like this is to confront it. She said, you are definitely going to be doing the asking from now on. But we won't get any more volunteers, Josie wailed, and I'll scare everyone off. Gabby laughed. No, you'll learn how to put together a sentence even when you're nervous, and then you'll thank me for changing your life. Josie, Gabby, come sing, Henry called from down the hall. Josie glanced up at the clock. Kids are waiting for us. We should probably go perform. Okay, but you're not leaving this hospital until we talk to the x-ray techs, Gabby said. They headed back to the lounge. Josie assumed they were just going for Clementine and Oscar, but as soon as they got there, Gabby headed for the costume closet. Help me pick something fun, she said to Josie. Josie looked at Oscar. Sure, he'd be as taken aback by this as she was, but he was still slumped on the sofa, cuddling Clementine. Sure, Josie said. She followed Gabby into the closet where she figured Gabby would choose one of the more elegant outfits, like the shimmery angel gown. But after going through the rack, Gabby held up a brightly striped candy cane outfit bedecked with bells. What do you think? She asked. I think I can't believe Gabby Chavez, queen of the 6th grade, would ever wear something like that, Josie said. As soon as the words were out, her lips pressed together. But of course it was too late. Gabby was silent for a moment, and Josie could feel herself shrinking down in her costume. She'd probably ruined everything with her thoughtless remark. It was true, of course, but that just made it worse. Finally, Gabby gestured to Josie in the Mrs. Claus outfit. I guess we all have a secret side, she said. You with that voice of yours, Oscar being a super spy, and me getting silly with little kids. Josie couldn't help but feeling that there were more to it. She was going to keep her mouth shut. As that, all that mattered was that Gabby liked helping. Plus, she had a point about the hospital and the secrets. And really, Aisha's the queen of 6th grade, Gabby added as she pulled on the candy cane costume, which jingled loudly. I'm just one of the crowd. It wasn't true, but Josie didn't care. The kids were waiting, and she was ready to sing. All right, so we're on 166, right at the dog bone. There's a change of scenery. We're going to go to a different setting to finish out chapter 16, and this is a long one. So if you need to take a break, go use the restroom, move around, get a snack, whatever, this is probably a good time. An hour later, they were back. Gabby flopped down on the sofa, clearly tired from all her dancing. Oscar went over to the window and looked out, Clementine at his heels. The little dog had only left his side to greet Patience, and now she pressed against him, her short tail wagging. Oscar knelt down so he could give her ears a good rub. After a moment, I just keep yawning. Gabby sat up. So, now we need to go to X-ray, she said. But first, I want to know how it's going with the sibling act. She and Josie looked at Oscar, who obviously hadn't been listening. What? He asked, as though coming back from a very faraway place in his mind. Josie figured he was thinking about his parents, and she wished there was something she could say or do to help. The sibling act? Gabby said evenly, though she was tugging rather hard on one of her curls and making the bells on her costume ring. Have you even started asking kids or planning what you want the kids to do? Not yet, Oscar said vaguely. Well, we really need to get going on that, Gabby said. We have to give the final list to Miss D'Amato in 6 days. Josie and I are doing everything we can, and you need to help out too. Oscar gave Clementine one last pat and then stood up. I'll take care of it, he said, but I need to head home now. Gabby shot him an irritated look. You can't stay for 5 minutes to plan this? No, Oscar said, slipping on his coat and grabbing his book bag. He pushed the door so hard it triggered the mechanism that kept it wide open, but he didn't stop to close it. He just headed out, his shoulders hunched and his hat pulled low. Whatever, Gabby huffed, standing up. She looked at Josie. Let's go talk to the X-ray technicians. Stay, Josie told Clementine, who sat obediently on the sofa. Josie thought about closing the door, but figured it would be nice for Clementine to see people passing by, so she left it as it was. He's not going to get it done, Gabby complained as they waited for the elevator. I think he will, Josie said. She wasn't sure, but she wanted to give Oscar the benefit of the doubt. Gabby waved a dismissive hand as the elevator doors opened. It doesn't matter. I'll take care of it if he doesn't. I really do think Oscar will handle it, Josie said. He's just having a bad day today. He seems to have a lot of those, Gabby said with a sniff. Obviously, Josie couldn't tell Gabby what was going on with Oscar, but she wished Gabby would be just a bit more understanding. As they made their way to the X-ray lab, Josie's chest began to fill with butterflies. Breathe, Gabby told her. And imagine that the people you're talking to are naked. Ew, Josie exclaimed. Gabby giggled. I read that's what you're supposed to do if you get nervous speaking to big groups, she said. That way you aren't intimidated by the people you're talking to. No, just totally mortified to be in a room full of naked people, Josie said. Gabby laughed harder, and Josie couldn't help joining in. Gabby was fun. It was hard to imagine that Josie had ever been intimidated by her. Okay, this is it, she said as they got to the lab. You can do it. Josie wasn't so sure, but she opened the door and walked in. A woman sat at a desk in front of a closed door behind which Josie figured the actual X-raying took place. The woman was packing up her briefcase, and she frowned slightly when she saw them. Yes, she said. Josie took the big breath Gabby had advised and almost choked on it. Are you okay? The woman asked. I'm fine, Josie said, her eyes watering. I'm Josie, and we're here to ask you about the Christmas festival. She'd managed a full sentence, but the woman was looking at her blankly. Every year, the hospital has this kind of festival, Josie said. It's on Christmas Eve, and it's a festival with performances and stuff. It was no longer going as well. The woman tipped her head to the side as she stared at Josie. I know about the festival. Is there a reason you're telling me about it? She said. Yes, Josie said, taking a second to try and calm the butterflies that were beating furiously in her chest. The way the woman was tapping her fingers on the desk impatiently was not helping at all. We are signing up performers, Gabby said, nodding at Josie to go on. And we wondered if some people in your department People like you, would want to help. Help backstage? The woman asked, her brows drawing together. Well, we were thinking you could make up a skit about a skeleton Christmas since you guys do stuff with bones, she said. She wanted to cringe at how dumb that sounded, but then the woman actually smiled for the first time. Cute idea, she said. So you'll do it? Gabby asked, pulling out the phone. But the woman shook her head. I'm more of a backstage person. Josie's hopes were instantly squashed. But I can ask the others, the woman said. We have a few drama queens around here. Maybe some of them will want to help out. Thanks, Josie said, trying to sound appreciative instead of dismal. That wasn't bad, Gabby said once they were back in the hall and heading up to the volunteer room. You don't have to be nice, Josie said, her feet dragging in her Mrs. Claus boots. I know I was awful. I mean it, Gabby insisted. You actually managed to ask her, and that's a big deal. Yeah, except for the part where she said no, Josie said. They were back on the ward, and she was eager to get her dog. Clementine always made her feel better. But Gabby put a hand on her arm. She didn't say no, she corrected. She was tired and wanted to go home, but she still liked your idea and said she'd ask around. I wouldn't be surprised if she found some people and we actually get our Christmas skeleton skit. You really think so? Josie asked. Gabby nodded, her face serious. I do, she said. And really, Josie, you did a great job asking. It turned out Gabby could make people feel better, too. Josie was smiling as they headed into the volunteer lounge. But then she looked around, and the smile evaporated. The sofa was empty. Where's Clementine? Josie asked, her throat tightening, her voice shrill. Top of page 172. I thought she was here, Gabby said, coming in behind Josie. Did she go into the closet? But Clementine wasn't there. Well, she has to be somewhere, Gabby said, resting a hand on Josie's arm. I bet she just smelled cookies down the hall or something. Josie's heart was skittering wildly in her chest, and it was getting hard to breathe. Clementine always stayed when Josie told her to stay. Always. There was no way she would just wander off. Josie, Gabby said, her voice calm as she looked right into Josie's eyes. We are going to look for her, and we are going to find her. The soothing way she spoke allowed Josie to take a shaky breath. Okay, she said. Gabby headed straight for the nurse's station. Clementine is missing, she announced to Nurse Joe. His eyes widened. He turned to the other nurses. We need to find Clementine ASAP. Then he looked back at Josie and Gabby. When did you realize she was gone? Josie wasn't sure she could talk with her throat squeezed so tight, but it turned out she didn't need to. We went down to the x-ray department about 20 minutes ago, Gabby said. Clementine was on the couch in the volunteer room when we left, but she wasn't there when we got back. Could she have somehow opened the door? Nurse Joe asked. The door was wedged open, Gabby said. There was a tray of gingerbread cookies on the desk next to them, and the smell made Josie's stomach churn. Why hadn't she closed the door when she left Clementine in the lounge? How could she have made such a terrible mistake? Okay, so she probably wandered off, Nurse Joe said. He gave Josie a steady look. And we're going to search every inch of this place until we track her down. We'll help, Jade said, coming up with Ed and leaning over to squeeze Josie's arm. They were dressed in their regular clothes, ready to go home. And Josie was dimly aware that she felt grateful they were staying to search for her dog. We're going to find her, Ed said. Josie nodded, even though she felt like she might faint or throw up. Or both. But Gabby and Nurse Joe took charge. Calls were placed, and soon every nook and cranny of the hospital had someone assigned to search it for Clementine. We're in charge of the peds ward, Gabby announced when everyone else had been assigned. So she and Josie went into each room, asking all the kids and their parents, but not a single person had seen Clementine. I'm sure someone else found her, Gabby said as they went back to the nurse's station 30 long, terrible minutes later. But Josie could hear the waver of doubt in her voice. The bright colors of the ward had dimmed for Josie, as though she were walking through a gray fog that had seeped into her skin and filled up her chest, making her clammy and cold inside and out. I bet someone found her snacking on treats in the cafeteria, and they're bringing her up right now, Gabby said. But she was pulling on a curl as she spoke, her eyes darting around, looking to see if anyone, was bringing back Clementine. They stood at the nurse's station, Josie leaning against the desk because it was too much to stand, Gabby with a warm hand resting on her back. The elevator doors opened and Nurse Joe stepped out. Josie drew in a breath, ready to ask, but then she saw his face, and that told her everything. I'm so sorry, Josie, but Clementine isn't anywhere in the hospital, he said. Well, then where can she be? Gabby asked, wrapping an arm around Josie. She's gone, Josie said, her voice breaking. Someone stole Clementine. And then she burst into tears. Oh, no. All right, I made a separate video for chapter 17, so go back to your checklist and click it if you want to read along with me for chapter 17.